guys, it's Lotus and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to continue on with our read-along of Erha. Let's jump right into it. Chapter 96, This Venerable One's Hatred Born in This Life. It was no wonder that Ye Wangxi despised him. This Mei Han Shui was that Da Shi Shang from the Peach Blossom Springs that got countless female cultivators to coo and squabble jealously over him. Nan Gongsi had initially thought that the new arrival was some powerful character, but it only turned out to be some pretty boy that relied all on looks. All of his interests vaporized in an instant, and he turned back to the battle at hand. Mei Han Shui glanced at Shui Meng, a little exasperated, but paid him no mind as he lowered his brows and his fingers danced over the strings of the pipa. Hearing the notes, the 100 cultivators of Ta Shui Palace spread out in all directions. Guqin Division played the song of Alcade. Pippa Division performed the magic-canceling dance. At his command, the ensemble changed its tune immediately, countless strong, fast-paced chords gathering in the air into a resounding refrain that scattered the clouds. Immediately, all the demonic fiends stopped fighting, standing in place instead with their necks outstretched and hollow stares on their faces. Seeing this, Li Wuxin remembered that those of Kunlun Ta Shui Palace were not only masters of music, but also knew something of barrier mending. Delighted, he tilted his head up and yelled, "Esteemed nephew Mei, would you happen to know how to mend the heavenly rift?" Paying no heed to that gross, esteemed nephew address, Mei Han Shui answered, "The heavenly rift of the infinite hells is beyond my abilities." "Ah, this!" Li Wuxin's face paled. Then he swept his sleeve and let out a long sigh. "Han Shui, what about the barrier around Butterfly Town? Would you be able to hold that down?" "Oh, no."
"Han Shui, what about the barrier around Butterfly Town? Would you be able to hold that down?"
The speaker was Shui Zhengyang. Sisheng Peak and Ta Shui Palace have always been on good terms, so Mei Han Shui, seeing a familiar senior, bowed courteously before answering, "I can try."
"Great!"
Shui Zhengyang clapped his hands together.
"Go guard the barrier in the 4 directions. Make sure the demons don't get out, and call Yu Heng back."
Yu Heng Elder?
"Ah, my damn memory. Forgot you've never met Yu Heng before. Don't worry, you'll know him when you see him. Just look for the person holding down the barrier right now."
Got it. Mei Han Shui, calm and collected, flew off toward the edge of the town with a tilt of his sword, like a shooting star upon the wind. Nan Gongsi knocked 3 arrows onto his bow and shot in 3 directions at once. Between the thrumming of the bowstring, he saw Mei Han Shui shoot past with speed and grace, while the rest of the people from Ta Shui Palace continued to suppress the enemy with musical chords. Surprised in spite of himself, he asked Ye Wangxi, "This person seems quite capable after all. Why did you call him a pretty boy who relies on women to do the fighting?" ... Ye Wangxi was baffled as well, but the fiends were moving slowly right now, presenting an ideal opportunity to take them out, so he didn't waste time trying to figure it out, replying only, "It seems he didn't go all out against me back then," before turning back to the enemy and saying no more. 4 of the 10 great sects were now present, making the fight against the Heavenly Rift somewhat less of a desperate struggle, but still harrowing nonetheless. Although the fiends currently on the ground were frozen by the cores of Ta Shui Palace, more and more oozed out from the bloody eye connecting to the ghost realm by the minute, shrieking and howling. The force from Ta Shui Palace was positioned in the air, but couldn't defend themselves while playing, so the demonic fiends rushed toward the Pippa and Guqin players between the clouds. They had no choice but to divert a portion of their force to play the Song of Defense, instantly weakening the Song of Suppression and Exorcism, and allowing the masses of fiends on the ground to resume their frenzied rampage. Even worse, as the door to the ghost realm opened wider still, some high-level demons consumed enough of the mortal realm's yang energy to break free of their feathers and cross into this world as well, dragging their chains and shackles behind. These were none like the minor fiends from before. They were possessed by both their corpse and resentful soul in one, and were much more powerful and vicious, far beyond what the average cultivator could handle alone. Instantly, some stragglers were slammed over in one strike, their chests skewered right through by bony claws. With a wet gushing sound, blood splattered all about as the high-level demons ripped the spiritual energy-filled hearts from those cultivators and bit greedily into them. fresh blood squelching out and streaming down the rotting flesh of their faces. Mouths covered in blood and dangling with pieces of flesh, the demons grew even stronger, plunging into the crowd and seeking their next meal like beasts of prey. Instantly, all hell broke loose. Shui Zhengyang shouted,
"Set arrays and form groups! Stay together! Don't run off!"
But some had already lost their head to fear, running about in hysterics, screaming and crying as they fled every which way. The stench of blood in the air grew stronger. The demonic fiends amassed like the tide, as did the corpses of the dead. Letting fly arrow after arrow, Nan Gongzi was going all out when a hanged ghost with its blood-red tongue dangled from its mouth rushed in and latched onto him, raising its claw and going straight for his chest. Ye Wangxi was too far away when he turned and saw, all color draining instantly from his usually composed face. "Ah-si!" "Gongzi!" In the nick of time, Song Chu-tong sprung over with her sword and stabbed the hanged ghost in the arm. But she never even killed a person before, much less a ghastly fiend like this, so she let go right after in fear, the long sword falling to the ground with a clang. The hanged ghost lunged out at her in rage, and Nan Gongzi switched bow for sword to block in front of her as he yelled, "Get away from here, hurry!" Song Chu-tong's eyes glistened with tears, saying, "Chu-tong's life was saved by Rufeng's sect. This one cannot possibly leave." Nan Gongzi had little experience in dealing with women, but seeing her delicate demeanor and that determination in her eyes, he felt a squeeze in his heart and couldn't help cursing under his breath as he called, "Ye Wangxi! Ye Wangxi, get the hell over here! Look after her for me!" Ye Wangxi arrived covered in blood, grime, and filth staining his handsome face. He grabbed Song Chu-tong by the arm and said harshly, "Go find Qin Shishang and stick with him." "I'm not leaving! I can still help!" she pleaded. "Young master, I want to stay by your side!" "Ye Wangxi, make sure you protect her!" Ye Wangxi's face darkened immediately. Being the upstanding gentleman that he was, he rarely ever showed such anger on his face. "Nan Gongzi," the syllables trembled, broken. "You must have lost your mind." Then, paying no more mind to the other two, he took hold of his sword and vaulted away back into the surging masses of undead. More and more high-level demons appeared, mixing into the crowd like daggers slicing open the stomach of the fish, peeling off its scales, glistening scales sticky with blood, rising and falling. It was every man for himself as the fiends surrounded the living, wanting nothing more than to devour each and every one of them, dragging them into the infinite hells. Moran, Xuemeng, and Shimei fought back to back against the demons in all directions, but the clearing around them was shrinking as the enemy closed in. There was a wet sound as Xuemeng cut the arms off a fierce fiend, and foul blood shot several feet into the air. The attacking fiends saw that this person was strong, and so circled around towards Shimei instead. Shimei's hands were held in a spell sign, but his spiritual energy was draining, and the water light array flickered in brightness. Knowing that they wouldn't be able to hold out for much longer at this rate, Moran made up his mind, saying, "Shimei, put up a shield array! Xuemeng, get in!" "What?" Xuemeng got mad instantly. "You telling me to be a wimp? Just listen to me and get in! Is this the time to be stubborn about appearances? Look around you. You think we can kill this many ghosts?" Shimei said, "Aran, what are you going to do?" "Don't ask so much, just do as I told you." Moran gentled his tone. It'll be all right." The circle around them closed even more. Moran urged, "Quickly, there's no more time!" Shimei could only adjust his hand seal to raise a layer of blue-colored shielding array around Xuemeng and himself. Seeing the array complete, Moran pulled out the weapon hidden in his sleeve and swiped it across his palm to sprinkle the array with his own blood, marking it with his spiritual energy. Then, gaze hardening, he called out in a low voice, "Get to work!" Jengui flared bright at his words, each leaf ablaze with the glow of scarlet spiritual energy, like so many sharp daggers hanging from the willow vine as it suddenly grew in length by tens of feet. Moran closed his eyes, recalling in his mind the sight of Chuaning unleashing his killing technique, and when he opened them again, in his eyes were reflected the countless ghastly fiends closing in. He whipped Jangoi high up into the sky above, sparks erupting off the vine and raining down. Moran held up his arm, his sleeve whipping in the wind. In that moment, his silhouette seemed to overlap with that of Chuaning in his mind, the two moving in perfect sync. Wind! A burst of force that ravaged the land and urged the very clouds above, pulling low the sky itself. Behind Moran, Shuemeng and Shinmei watched as an enormous light array in scarlet bloomed like a red lotus from hell, fierce gales whipping the ground like formless blades as Jiangui whirled into a blur in Moran's hand, sending dust and debris swirling into the air. The overwhelming force pulling countless fiends into the maelstrom and grounding them into mince. Chuaning's area-killing technique, wind. Moran could already use it this well. By the time the tempest settled down, there was absolutely nothing left in the area. Both Shuemeng and Shinmei wore shocked expressions when Moran turned around, but he had no time to celebrate, feeling only that he was far from where he needed to be. If he had the cultivation level that he once did right now, something so trifling as a fracture in the ghost realm barrier would have been nothing to him. "Look over there!" Someone suddenly called in the distance. Everyone looked up to see several contingents high up in the sky, riding in on swords from various directions, each group dressed differently and shrouded by different spiritual energies. The heavenly rift of the infinite hells had finally urged the sects of the upper cultivation realm into action. The glowing swords touched down one after another, bringing a massive influx of reinforcements. Over here were the graceful and charming personages from Rainbell Isle, and over there were the solemn and dignified monks from Wu Bei Temple. Finally, the 10 great sects were all present. Even stronger demons were crossing into this world, endless like swarming locusts, but with the sudden arrival of reinforcements, they were no longer so outmatched. At the same time, Meihan Shui and Chuaning finally completed the spiritual transfer, the color of the barrier at the cardinal directions of the town changing from gold to blue. With Meihan Shui guarding the borders, Chuaning rode the wind into the center of the battle, landing gracefully where the fighting is most fierce. He looked up at the rift in the sky, completely open by now, with some kind of immeasurable and terrifying evil vaguely perceptible from within. He could practically feel the entity's insane strength, as if it had drunk the blood and consumed the brains of millions. The barrier must be sealed now, or else the great evil being suppressed within the infinite hells will break free and cross into the mortal realm. Chuaning couldn't help wondering if this was what the person behind the scenes was after, to unleash some kind of great evil from hell into this world. But to what end? "Shizun!" Shinmei called anxiously after him. Chuaning turned toward the voice. Memories from the past life once again overlaid the present scene. "Shizun!" Shinmei had called for him the same way back then. Chuaning turned toward the voice. Shinmei panted in the snow, covered in blood and grime, but his eyes were firm and determined. "Shizun is going to mend the heavenly rift?" But that's not just any fracture. That's a fracture into the infinite hells. How will Shizun manage by himself? ... "Let me help. I studied the defensive arts at the Peach Blossom Springs. I won't get in Shizun's way." It was almost as if he could hear the exchange between the two, so many years ago, that determined life and death. Moran felt his blood run cold and his head go numb. Without warning, he grabbed Shinmei and pulled him behind himself, then shoved him into Shuemeng, yelling, "Xue Ziming, keep an eye on him! Look after him!" Shuemeng's eyes widened. "You going somewhere, mutt?" The wind picked up, carrying with it the stench of blood. There was no flurry of snowflakes in the sky. At least some things were different from the last lifetime. Moran's gaze landed on Shinmei, lost and helpless, feeling his heart clench, but then fill with relief. This barrier cannot be mended by Chuaning alone. But aside from his 3 disciples, no one else had the familiarity with his spiritual cultivation to work together with him in rapport, so one of them had to go. The wind whipped fiercely through the battlefield, thousands of miles of desperate slaughter. Bracing himself, Moran pulled Shinmei into his arms. It was the first time he had ever held him like this so openly and directly. He held him for a moment, and then abruptly pushed him away. "Shinmei, this time, I'm afraid the one to die will have to be me." "I'll go help Shizun steal the barrier," Moran declared in a tone that left no room for argument. Narrowing his eyes, he directed another deep, meaningful gaze at Shinmei. Suddenly, he didn't care what others might think anymore. Didn't care that Shuemeng was right there. Didn't care that he might get rejected. He had waited for 2 lifetimes, loved for 2 lifetimes, and now he was leaving and might not be able to come back. Standing in the ferocious wind, he wanted to say a few final words to his beloved. Shimei, actually, But just then, as he opened his mouth to speak, the roars of vicious fiends drowned out his voice. That momentary impulse, boiling hot like lava, grew cold in that momentary pause, and in the end, fizzled out. Aran, did you want to say something? A reflection from his past life flitted across Moran's eyes. If he saw Shimei's gentle smile from behind that half-rolled curtain, how cruel it had been. It had stayed with him for his whole life until death, and it was everywhere that he looked. The rims of his eyes a little red, Moran grinned. Never mind, good things can't be said twice. Shimei, you... I'm off to go help Shizun. When I come back, if I still feel like telling you... Dimples deep, gaze filled with love. I'll tell you then. With that, he turned and headed toward Chuaning. Shimei won't die now. At least, he won't die in front of him. Moran suddenly felt as if the sky was more open and the ground more vast. He supposed that the figure in front of him, white robes billowing, will be the end point of this reborn life of his. His Shizun, who held the world in his heart. As Shimei lay dying, for the sake of completing the mending of the barrier, for the sake of purging the rampaging fiends, Chuaning had ruthlessly chosen to leave. This time, the one to repair the barrier with him was himself. Chuaning despised him so much, disliked him so much. There was no way he'd put down his esteemed reputation as the Beidou immortal to mind the life or death of someone so insignificant as himself. Shizun! He came to a stop in front of him, Jengui glowing in his hand. This barrier is hard to repair. Let me help. The situation was dire. Chuaning shot him a wordless glance in silent acceptance. He leapt up to stand at the highest point of the Chen Manor, with Moran following after. Chuaning spoke. Set the discernment barrier. Following his instructions, Moran moved in concert with him, one to the left and one to the right, the tips of their fingers glowing with the seal of the discernment barrier as they lifted their hands into the air in concert. Invoke. Their spiritual energies streamed forth from their bodies at the invocation, working in rapport, and each holding down a vital grounding point of the array, using the surge of their cultivation to form a gold-scarlet barrier that expanded outwards. Any demonic fiends touched by the barrier would shriek as if burned and flee back into the eye of the ghost realm. The barrier grew clearer and brighter by the second, and below their feet rose a pair of coiled dragon platforms formed of spiritual energy, lifting the two of them high into the skies above. In the glaring gold and scarlet light of the barrier, the ghost eyes slowly began to close, but, as if refusing to yield, the resentful spirits within grew even wilder. The resentful energy spilling forth grew stronger with each inch of the closure, and by the time they were some 1,000 meters away from the rift, the corruption from within was practically palpable. In his reborn body, Moran felt as if a heavy weight was beginning to settle over his shoulders, like an immense rock weighing 1,000 tons was pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. Across from him, Chuaning's spiritual energy was still strong and steady, streaming unceasingly into the barrier. 1 inch, another inch. The corruption in the air had concentrated into one spot. It felt as if countless daggers were digging into his very flesh and bones. Shizun! As his consciousness slowly began to fade, he seemed to see memories from the past again. Shimei and Chuaning working together to repair the barrier, and it was mere moments before the worlds of yin and yang would be separated once again. The vicious ghosts that were about to be deprived of yang energy once more saw that Shimei's side was much weaker. They gathered together and lunged towards Shimei as one. Sha! In only an instant, Shimei, who had been doing his best to maintain the balance of the barrier, was pierced right through. The scene replayed almost exactly the same way. Only this time, it was Moran whose heart was pierced through by 1,000 ghosts. From the heavenly rift, a cascade of demonic fiends broke through the heavenly clouds and punched through Moran's chest in an instant. Moran saw red before his eyes, and it wasn't until a moment later that he came to his senses and realized that that was his blood bursting forth from his own chest. Drowning in the suffocating stream, he strained to turn toward Chuaning, only to be met with the sight of the man's pristine white robes and coldly impassive face, not even sparing him so much as half a glance. Resentment flooded his chest, setting into deep hatred. He fell from the coiled dragon platform, blood seeping from the corner of his lips, chest dyed a deep crimson. The fall took only a moment, but it felt like an eternity, like a drowning person sinking slowly to the bottom of the sea, never again to hear the soft whispers of the living world. Chuaning hadn't lifted a single finger on his behalf, hadn't tried to stop them, couldn't even be bothered to glance his way. When he fell, the scarlet spiritual energy dissipated, and just like in the previous lifetime, Chuaning chose to pour the remainder of his powers into the portion that Moran wasn't able to mend, and, by his strength alone, forced the barrier shut with a thunderous bang. But the fiends left on this side of the gate, cut off from the yin energy of the ghost realm, immediately went into a frenzied rampage against the cultivators, mowing through countless of the living in mere moments, utterly annihilating the formations of several sects. Chuaning descended. When Moran fell, a layer of light had formed beneath the coiled dragon pillar to cushion his fall, but his whole chest had been pierced through, and blood pooled on the ground beneath him, no different from Shimei back then. Chuaning beat back the fiends that rushed toward Moran and, with a backhanded wave, dropped the protective barrier around him. "Shizun," the person behind him muttered quietly. "Are you leaving?" Moran coughed out blood, but there was a grin on his face. "Are you leaving again?" Outside the flowing golden barrier, that person continued to stand with his back to him. Moran opened his mouth, but his throat filled suddenly with the taste of iron. "Chuaning, are you made of wood? You don't know what it is to feel sad, to be selfish, do you? Chuaning. Chuaning." His vision blurred. He was covered in wounds from the battle. Blood streamed from a cut on his forehead, flowed into his eyes, and as he threw his head back and laughed with abandon into the skies above, laughed as if he had gone mad, bloody tears fell down his face. His voice broke on a sob. "Chuaning, turn around. Look at me. Are you really going to leave?" "Won't you look at me one last time? I'm dying. Back then, when it was Shimei, you had at least spared him a glance. Do you really dislike me this much? Look down on me this much? Why else would you refuse to look at me? Just this one last time. Why won't you turn around? Shizun." His eyes brimmed with blood and tears. The last thing he saw through the golden barrier was the back of that lone person's white-robed figure as he walked away, to go suppress demons. So, in the end, it turned out that in his heart, there was no one else less important than Mo Wei-yu. End of chapter 96. Wow, so wow, that was really heavy. A lot happened. Moran ended up reliving the past. He decided to go in place of Shimei to help Chuaning mend the barrier. And like Shimei, he ended up getting pierced in the chest. And in his dying moments, he's calling out to Chuaning, begging for him to look at him, but Chuaning doesn't turn around. So what is Moran feeling? Oh my gosh. Okay, let's keep reading. Chapter 97, This Venerable One. Moran. Wait, is it? Okay, Moran. Moran. Someone seemed to be calling him. He opened his eyes, bleary and dazed, to an unfocused white silhouette. Vaguely, he felt as if this person looked like Chuaning, but at the same time, he also didn't quite dare to believe it. He felt that person's hands folded over his chest, channeling an unbroken stream of spiritual energy into the wreckage there that was still bleeding nonstop. So warm. Who? He blinked arduously, trying to get a look at that blurry figure. Moran. Shizun? He fought down the blood welling in his throat to ask in a murmur. He felt something warm and wet fall on his cheek. Slowly, his vision cleared up enough to see a pair of phoenix eyes, softly beautiful with a hint of melancholy like the apricot blossoms of Jiangnan, against a face that was deathly pale and stained with blood. Moran was at a loss as he stared dazedly at him. He had never seen such an expression on Chuaning's face before. His Shizun had always been coldly impassive, but the person before him now was crying. Moran reached up with a hand, wanting to touch, wanting to check if it was real or just the hallucinations of a dying man. But the tips of his fingers mere inches from that person's face, he paused. Sometimes hating someone was a kind of habit. If suddenly he shouldn't hate him anymore, then he wouldn't know what to do. He didn't dare touch. He was afraid it might be real, but also afraid it might not be. Behind Chuaning, he saw mountains of corpses and oceans of blood. He couldn't quite tell if it was the battleground at Butterfly Town, or if he had already gone to hell. He was well aware that he had committed countless evils, had sinned irredeemably, that he belonged in the infinite hells, never again to be reincarnated. But Chuaning, he was a good person. Why would he be here with him, to suffer an eternity in hell? Just a little more. Chuaning's voice was distant and hazy, as if uttered through the depth of an ocean. You have to stay awake, or else. He watched blood seep from the corner of Chuaning's mouth. The golden light grew brighter and brighter until the person before his eyes was suddenly enveloped in the blinding glow, turning into the form of a child. Or else you are no disciple of mine!
Sha Shuni!
Chuaning turned into Sha Suni right in front of his eyes. Moran was so shocked that his wound suddenly blazed with pain, and he passed out again before he could process a single thought.
Moran!
A voice so soft it was almost a sigh. He did not know if it was a hallucination of the past life, or a lingering murmur by his ear.
I'm sorry, it was this master's fault.
This again. This again. Chuaning, I don't want you to apologize. I want you to... To what? He faltered, not knowing what it was that he wanted. If he didn't want him to apologize, then what did he want him to do? His eyes shot open. Breathing harshly, clothes soaked through with sweat, Moran looked up to see a clean, tidy room, sparsely decorated. He was back at his room in Sixiang Peak. He actually lived! Disbelievingly, he glanced around himself, then raised a hand that was a bit cold to feel the injury on his chest. It was wrapped in several layers of bandages. Blood had seeped through the gauze and dyed it red, and it hurt a little when touched. But underneath, his heart was still beating rhythmically, powerfully, beating with the promise of the rest of his life. He lived. He lived! Blood coursed wildly, powerfully through his youthful body, making the tips of his fingers tremble, thrumming through his very soul. He heard the sound of curtains being lifted. Moran looked up from where he was sitting on the bed and came face to face with the beauty that had just entered. It was probably cold outside. His long black hair cascaded loosely over a white mantle lined with fur, and when he lifted those soft bright eyes, there was a faint redness at their corners, more beautiful than any makeup. Shimei hadn't expected Moran to be awake already, and started a little before saying, "Moran, you...
Shimei! Shimei!"
Moran called his name a bunch of times, eyes bright and glittering like obsidian. He jumped off the bed, ignoring the protest of his wound, and grinned toothfully while throwing himself at Shi Mingjing, hugging him tightly, ecstatically repeating over and over,
"I'm so glad! You're alive! I'm alive! It's over! It's all over!"
The heavenly rift had been the greatest calamity of his past life. Fiends and demons had descended from above, taken Shimei, and pushed Moran into the abyss of sin. It was the one thing that had kept him constantly on edge after rebirth, fearful that it would happen all over again, that he would be left all alone again, treading on the bones of those he had once loved and cared for on the lonely path toward an empty Wushan palace. But the heavens were not unkind to him, and everything had changed when he stood up, willing to die in Shimei's place. He won't be all alone anymore, abandoned and rebuked by all, won't be forced to Liangshan Mountain in the dead of night, henceforth a lonely wanderer. From now on, the curse is broken. He had truly escaped the nightmare of his past life now, truly been reborn. Moran clung to Shimei for a long time before letting go, his eyes bright like fireworks, glittering like the starry night. Shimei stood there, dazed and unmoving, while Moran wrapped his arms around his shoulders and looked down at him, smiling. They stayed like that for a long time before Shimei slowly broke out of his daze and leaned in of his own accord to press his forehead against the lower side of Moran's jaw.
"Moran!"
When Shimei lifted his face, he wore a faint smile, but his eyes were a little wet.
"I'm so glad you're okay."
Smiling, Moran stroked his hair, then took his hands in his own, reassuring. "Silly, of course I'm okay. Why wouldn't I be? Before he could say more, the curtain was lifted again as someone else strode in. "Xuemeng?" ... What a petty guy, probably still upset that he got outdone at the Butterfly Town battle. He wore a sullen expression, and his lips were pressed into a thin line. Seeing Moran up and about, he only paused for a beat before turning to speak to Shimei, When'd he wake up? Shimei hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice sounding a little worried.
Just now.
I see. Shurameng acknowledged, still refusing to look at Moran. Moran thought to himself, look at this little brat, sulking so much just 'cause he got showed up. It's like he got his candy stolen or something. But he was in quite the good mood, so he was willing to overlook it. Smiling, he said, looks like I was out for a while, huh? Who brought me back? Who else? Shurameng flung his sleeve and folded his hand behind. Of course, it was Shizun. Ah. Moran was taken aback by his words. Fragments of blurry memories from when he'd been drifting in and out of consciousness passing before his eyes. He was just so overwhelmed with shock and elation, now that he was awake, that he was even less sure if the things he'd seen back then were real or not. He mumbled, Shizun, Sha Shidi. Hearing his murmur, Shurameng jerked almost imperceptibly before saying stiffly, So you saw? What? That Sha Shidi is Shizun. Moran was still only guessing, and his entire face went pale at being suddenly told outright like this. What? Shurameng's head snapped toward him, a strange expression on his face, like he was using all that he had to keep something in check. What? I thought you already knew. Moran yelped. How would I know that? When I was drifting in and out, and it was all blurry, I thought I might have seen the two of them overlapping. He thought about the time he'd spent with Sha Sini at the Peach Blossom Springs, the two of them sleeping in the same bed. He thought about when he lost control at Rainbell Isle, the golden hair clasp that had fallen out as he tore at Chuaning's robes, and the handkerchief, embroidered with a haitang blossom. Clothing that grew and shrunk with its wearer, the little jar of chicken soup held tightly in Sha Sini's arms, the way he had looked at him and called him Shishang, and how he had patted him on the head, grinning as he said that we'll be brothers from here on out. Shishang will dote on you. One after another, the memories materialized before his eyes and then scattered like smoke. Now it was Chuaning, his face impassive, expression much too cold, and now it was Sha Sini, his lips pressed together, refusing to talk. He had once said to Sha Sini that Chuaning was no good, that he disliked him. He had also once patiently brushed Sha Sini's long hair. His hair was so soft, flowing between his fingers like liquid ink. Now that he thought about it, they really were so much alike. Moran felt like his head was going to explode. He paced in place, back and forth, muttering, Shizun is Sha Shidi! Shizun is Sha Shidi! Shizun is... He came to an abrupt stop, almost crazed. You've got to be kidding me! How could Shizun possibly be Sha Shidi?
Run!
Moran didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Sure, they're pretty similar in a lot of ways, but they're not the same in the end. Sha Shidi is such a good person. How could... The hell do you mean by that? Shurameng cut him off, pinning him with a sharp glare. Sha Shidi is such a good person? So what? Such a good person cannot possibly be Shizun? Moran countered. Of course I'm not saying that Shizun isn't a good person. It's just that Sha Shidi has always been so sincere with me, and I basically saw him as my own little brother. How am I supposed to just accept you suddenly telling me that he's actually Shizun? Shurameng snarled. Sha Shidi is sincere, huh? Is Shizun insincere then? Hearing the temper rising in his voice, Shimei hurriedly tugged on his sleeve.
Young master, remember what uncle said. Aran just woke up,
But Shurameng shook him off, his brown eyes still fixed on Moran's face, so infuriated that even the vein at his neck was throbbing, looking like a hissing viper just about to sink its venomous fangs into its prey, ready to devour. Mo Wei Yu, you better explain to me right here and right now, why can't Shizun be Sha Sini? Where does he lack sincerity, huh? Tell me clearly, which part of him is fake to you? The flood of demanding questions only annoyed Moran a little. After all, it wasn't like he hadn't seen Shurameng pissed off before. In the last lifetime, Shurameng's temper had been more or less like this in every single one of their encounters after he became Emperor Ta Xianjun. But still, it was irksome. Moran frowned and snapped. What's it to you? That's between me and him. Between you and him? Shurameng repeated. Have you ever even thought about him? Moran was so mad he laughed instead. The hell's your problem? Your problem, Shui Ziming? Seriously, when'd you go and get mental? Come on, Shimei, let's go to Loyalty Hall. Maybe Uncle and Shizun know what's up with him. He brushed past Shurameng to leave, pulling Shimei along. Shurameng stood rooted in place for a while, as if trying hard to hold something down, but his restraint cracked as Moran was just about to step out of the door, and he whipped around roaring, "Mo Wei Yu! Have you ever spared a thought for this Shizun of yours?" ... Moran only felt even more agitated. His steps halted, originally cheerful and relaxed brows drawing low into a scowl. Shimei squeezed his hand, whispering uneasily,
"Don't mind him. He's been a bit irritable lately. Come on, let's go."
But his hand had only just made contact with the curtain, hadn't even lifted it yet, when Shuemeng's voice rang out, stifled, inflamed and distraught, like it had leapt out from a fire. "Mo Wei Yu, you effer! You piece of shit!" The curtain dropped back down with a swish. Moran closed his eyes, then opened them.
"Oh, run!"
Shimei tried to pull him back, but he was gently pushed aside. He turned his face, and then his body. The two of them were about the same age, but Moran was already taller by a chunk, and he could look quite cold and menacing when he wanted to. Moran suddenly smiled, but his black eyes were deep and without the slightest hint of a smile. He spoke. "So I'm a piece of shit now, huh?" "Shui Ziming, I have never treated Shizun with anything but respect, nor did I stand by and watch at the Battle of the Heavenly Rift. The barrier to the infinite hells couldn't be mended by his strength alone, so I stepped up to help. Let me ask you as his disciple, have I done anything wrong?" ... "My strength falls far short of his, so I wasn't able to hold out until the end. When mending the barrier, I fell from the coiled dragon pillar, but he didn't even spare me so much as a single glance, uncaring of whether I lived or died. Let me ask you again, in my shoes, would you not feel bitter and disappointed?"
"Moran."
Finally giving voice to the thing that had eaten away at him for 2 lifetimes, Moran's handsome features twisted into something dark as he spoke of his sore spot. He forced out each individual syllable, slowly and clearly enunciating every word. "As I see it, I've done my duty and owe him nothing. What gives you the right to stand here in front of me and call me a piece of shit? Shuemeng, do you think I've never cared for him? You're wrong. I have." "But he's made of stone," Moran continued in a low voice, every word like a knife to his heart, drawing blood. "Shuemeng, listen to me. I don't care what a powerful cultivator he is in the eyes of the world, what a prestigious zhongshe, that he's Yuheng of the night sky, Beidou immortal. None of that is important. What's important is that, at the Battle of the Heavenly Rift, I nearly died, but when I begged for him to look back, spare me a glance, he wouldn't even give that to me." It was such a chilling and raging thing, but he was strangely calm as he spoke of it, only his eyes were a little red. "And, Shuemeng, I can guarantee you, no matter who it was falling from the pillar back then, even if it wasn't me, even if it was you or Shimei, he wouldn't have saved you. Because I saw it with my own eyes." He had turned and left his own disciple's body to cool in the snowstorm that filled the sky. "There's nothing more important than his good name as the Beidou immortal, after all," Moran sneered coldly. Maybe it was the poor lighting, but he looked a little forlorn. "You'll live if you're lucky, die if you're not." His last word was still lingering in the air when there came a blur before his eyes alongside a rush of wind. The room was narrow and Shimei was behind him, so Moran couldn't dodge even though he sensed it coming, for fear of letting him come to harm, so he stood his ground and took the blow. Shuemeng lunged at him like a cheetah, gripping him by the collar, and a loud "pa" rang out in the air as Shuemeng slapped him across the face, holding nothing back. Getting slapped out of the blue like this, Moran's temper flared as well. He twisted his wrist to seize the raging youth, snarling through gritted teeth. "Shui Ziming, the F do you think you're doing?" Shuemeng didn't answer, instead roaring, "Mo Wei Yu, you bastard!" He had absolutely no interest in talking it out, rampaging like he was on something with no sense or reason to speak of, getting into a brutal brawl with Moran right there in that desolate little room, going at each other's throats like a pair of trapped beasts, like they wanted to rip each other to threads, tear one another apart and swallow the other, blood, bones, and all. A single lamp flickered in the room, casting their maddened silhouettes against the wall of stone, like a shadow play of beasts tearing into one another, like a picture of raging demons. Suddenly, Moran heard Shuemeng choke back a sob. It was so quiet, like he thought he must have heard wrong. But just as he thought that, several drops of tears landed on the back of his hand. Shuemeng suddenly let go of Moran and shoved him away, then curled up on the ground, wrapping his arms around his knees and started bawling miserably right there. Moran's cheek was still red and swollen, but he was utterly stumped at this turn of events, thinking that it wasn't like he'd actually pulled out any deadly moves, Surely he hadn't hurt him that bad. And besides, it was this cousin of his who threw the first punch to start with. Why all of this a sudden? He was still puzzling it over when he heard Shremung's voice, screaming hoarsely between broken sobs. How could you say he didn't save you? How could you say he didn't save you? Tears rolled down his cheeks, impossible to stop. To the side, Shinmei saw that Shremung couldn't keep things under wraps after all, so he sighed and looked down, said no more. Shremung choked out between sobs. He'll be so sad if he heard you say that from down below. These words were too sudden. Moran couldn't quite process them immediately. He asked in a daze. What? Shremung only kept crying. His venomous fang had pierced into Moran's neck, but it had also pricked himself. He wept so miserably, so brokenly, wiping desperately at his face, at his eyes, his gaze flickering between ferocity and sorrow. He wouldn't get up from where he crouched on the floor. He stayed there with his face buried in the crook of his arm for a long, long time. Moran felt a slow numbness climb up from the bottom of his feet until his entire body felt frozen. He felt his lips move, heard his voice ask, Shremung, what did you just say? Shremung cried for a long time, or maybe it wasn't actually that long at all, only that it felt like far too long to Moran as he waited for that thunderous jolt of an answer. Shizun, Shremung finally choked out. He's gone. For a moment, Moran had nothing to say. His whole body felt cold. Distantly, he heard the words, but he couldn't seem to understand them. Gone? What do you mean gone? Gone where? Who's gone? Who's gone? Who's gone? Shremung lifted his head slowly. There was hatred in his eyes, and mockery, and the deepest pain and loathing. Do you know why he didn't look back? ... Father said that sealing the heavenly rift took all that he had. Did you think you were the only one struck by the fiendish energy of the ghost realm? The discernment barrier is twined. Whatever damage you took, he suffered the same. It's just that he endured it and said nothing of it to anyone. Moran felt a droning between his ears. When he didn't save Shinmei in the previous lifetime, was that also because... Moran didn't dare finish the thought. The tips of his fingers trembled. No way! But he was so poised! When had he ever been anything but poised in front of others? Fresh tears welled up and overflowed in Shremung's eyes as he spoke. All of his spiritual energy had already been exhausted by the time he came down from there. Why do you think he put a protective barrier around you and left without looking at you? Shremung's words dripped with tears of blood. Shizun knew that he couldn't hold out much longer. His cultivation was high, so all the fiends would be drawn to him the moment he showed any weakness. Moran, did you think he left because he abandoned you? Moran, ... He left to protect you, Mo Wei Yu, so that you wouldn't get caught up in that. The fiends went berserk when the infinite hells closed. The battle dragged on till nightfall. Countless were killed or injured. Who had time for you? Even my father didn't know you were gone until he was already back at Sishong Peak with an injured Xuanji elder. Shremung paused for a moment, breathing harshly, before forcing the rest of the words through the tightness in his throat. Mo Wei Yu, he was the one who brought you back. He was the one who took the pill that lets him recover his original form, so that he could pull you from the bloody wreckage, from the mountain of corpses. He was the one already covered in wounds himself, but still gave you the last remnant of his spiritual power. No way! He was the one who brought you home. You were still unconscious, and his spiritual energy was completely drained. He was no different from an ordinary person at that time. Couldn't use any techniques at all. Still, not even a communication spell. He could only carry you on his back and climb up the stairs of Sishong Peak, step by step. No. Over 3,000 steps, without any spiritual power. Moran closed his eyes. He could almost see, under the pale moonlight, Chuaning carrying himself as he was on the verge of death, climbing slowly up those endless stairs, white robes stained bloody. That person had been so distant and unreachable, so pristine and untarnished. Beidou immortal, Yuheng of the night sky. Moran's throat felt tight, and his voice shook when he spoke. No way! How did he? I wondered the same. Shremung stared into the distance at a loss, the rims of his eyes red. When I saw him, I thought that surely I had gone mad, that I was seeing things, because I was also thinking. He sighed the rest. How did he? No way! Moran suddenly let out a sob and clutched his head, murmuring helplessly. No way! The stairs are still stained with a trail of blood. That's the road he took to bring you home. Shremung's hatred made him ruthless. Go look for yourself, Maran. Go look. No way! Shock and helplessness beyond what he could bear sent Maran into a rage. He grabbed Shremung from without warning, hauled him up off the ground, and slammed him against the wall, his face twisting into something bestial. No way! No effing way! How could he have saved me? He's always disliked me, always looked down on me. ... Shremung said nothing for a moment, then suddenly grinned miserably. Mo Wei Yu, it's not that he looked down on you. In the flowing candlelight, Shremung lifted his eyelashes, clumpy with tears, and leveled him with a gaze filled with hatred. It's that I look down on you. Maran, ... I look down on you. Xuanji Elder looks down on you. Tanlang Elder looks down on you. Who the F do you think you are? Shremung chewed up the words and spit them in Maran's face. You son of a bee! You! Shremung burst out laughing all of a sudden, tilting his head back to look up at the dim ceiling. Maran, out of the entirety of Sisheng Peak, the one who thought the most highly of you was him, but this is how you've paid him back. He laughed and laughed until he squeezed his eyes shut and tears began to fall again. This time, he wept quietly. Maran, your Sha Shudi, my Shizun, he's dead. Maran had been bitten by the most venomous snake in the world. Startled, he abruptly let go as if burned and stumbled backwards, finally understanding those words for the first time. His entire body began to tremble. Shremung suddenly called to him. Guh! Maran continued backing away, but his back collided against the ice-cold wall. There was no escape after all. Shremung finally stopped crying, but his voice was flat, like he was dead. Guh! We don't have a Shizun anymore. End of chapter 97. Okay. Author's notes. Big white cat's talking corpse. That's so mean, Meatbun, why? Big white cat's talking corpse. Thanking JJWXC readers. Pup, ... Ah, forget it. Pup 1.0 is glitching right now. 1.0 OS corrupted. Give him some time alone to digest the truth. Meng Meng, you do it. Shui Meng Meng, rest of the thanks. Bonus suffering, oh dear. Okay, well, so that was the end of chapter 97, and that is also the end of book 1. So, book 1 comes to a close, and to recap what has happened, like we said before, Maran took Shimei's place and got pierced through, and Shizun had to fight off the rest of the monsters by himself, and he ended up using up his remaining spiritual energy to put a barrier over Maran to protect him, and then also to heal him. And so by the time Shizun was trying to bring Maran's body back, he had lost all of his spiritual energy. He was essentially a normal human, an ordinary human with no powers anymore. But he still dragged himself with Maran's body up thousands of steps to get back to Shizun Peak before finally succumbing to his injuries. And so when Maran wakes up, he's pleasantly surprised to find that Shimei is still alive, but then finds out the sad, horrible truth from Shremung that their Shizun has passed away. Our poor Chuaning, our poor little Meow Meow. Oh my gosh, guys. He's dead. What are we gonna do? Oh, Maran, you done effed up here. You better be really filial to your Shizun in the next life, okay? Okay? You better not hurt him anymore. No more knives for Shizun. No more knives for Chuaning. All of you better be your best selves and the best disciples when he comes back, okay? Oh my gosh, guys. What are we gonna do? What is Maran gonna do? We know that Shizun's gonna come back because obviously if he died, the whole entire novel would be over, but we're gonna grieve for a little bit because he did sacrifice himself for Maran, and I wonder how Maran's gonna process it, because he believed all his life, in the past life and in this one as well, that Chuaning absolutely hated him, detested him, would never spare him a glance. But it turned out that Chuaning has protected him countless times and even babied him a little bit. He just didn't know it. Oh, okay guys. Well, like I said, this is the end of book 1. I hope you guys enjoyed. We will be starting book 2 in the next read-along. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed today's read-along. And I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye!